Perfect. All right. So without further ado, welcome to Lab to Land. This is ACARN's 2025 annual workshop. And a real big feature of this workshop is that we like to bring in folks from really all over the province and even all over the world. So you'll see up on your screen, we have a smattering of responses from this morning of where folks are joining us from. We've got territories all over BC. We've got some folks even as far as Bangladesh, south of France, all sorts of Indigenous territories, Secwepemc territory, Kwakwaka'wakw, Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Lekwungen, Treaty 8. And this is really, I think, the strength of this workshop is seeing all of you here and hearing all of your perspectives and really hearing and I guess identifying what are our kind of common issues and how we can support each other in these challenging times of really climate crisis. And I see as well, thanks for participating on screen with our kind of attendance poll. It's helpful for us to see which hats people are wearing for which sessions so that we can make sure we're putting together the best possible program that's interesting for all of you. So thanks for your responses. We'll take a look what we've got. I'll just share this up on the screen. So it looks like we've got some researchers, we've got some producers. Nice to have you here. I hope that you enjoy this session. Lots of folks from the agriculture industry, government policy and programs, and nice to see some students in the room. And for other, welcome. I hope that you're finding this event interesting. Perfect. All right, so for this session today, we're going to be talking about how we're addressing drought through on-farm research and extension in British Columbia. So over the next hour, we'll hear from three wonderful speakers who are kind of looking at how BC, through various distinct projects in distinct regions, are trying to action strategies towards helping producers cope with drought. So to start us off, we'll be hearing from Lisa Levesque on towards water security for agriculture in BC. And then we'll move into the expansion of a provincial weather monitoring network for agriculture with Andy Nadler, and finishing off with regenerating watercourses on ranches, how a nature-based solution, Beaver Dam Analogues, is working in the Nechako Valley with Wayne Saluski. So I'll start us off by giving a really warm welcome to Lisa Levesque, who's our first speaker of the day. Lisa Levesque will be speaking on, how we're moving towards water security for agriculture in BC. Lisa leads the water and sustainability team with the BC Ministry of Agriculture and Food, which is really taking action to support producers and try to build water security for agriculture through extension initiatives, education and funding programs, and really by improving that cross-agency awareness and collaboration to find creative solutions. So Lisa's team, I would say as a whole, is really focused on promoting sustainable water, riparian, and biodiversity management practices. And she has a passion for finding collaborative solutions to complex interdisciplinary problems, which certainly serves her well in this field of water management in BC. Lisa has been focused on programs, policies, and initiatives in multiple provincial government agencies since 2006, and holds a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science from the University of Guelph and a Master of Science in Interdisciplinary Science from the University of Victoria. So welcome, Lisa. We're so happy to have you here.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Asha, and I'll just shout out to Natasha for her excellent presentation this morning. I hope most of you caught it. I'll be following up on some of the things that she mentioned in that presentation. So Gila Castle, everyone. I'm joining you today from the Comox Valley, the unceded traditional territories of the Comox First Nation on Vancouver Island. So we have about 15 to 20 minutes together today. I'm going to start off by covering some drought basics to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of terminology and context. And then we'll dive into what I would describe as a rapid bird's eye view discussion of what our ministry is doing to try to build drought resilience and water security in BC's agriculture sector. All right, so without further ado, I think the slides will advance here. There we go. So drought is a recurrent feature of climate resulting from some combination of inefficient snow accumulation, hot and dry weather, and rainfall deficiency over an extended period of time that ultimately results in a water shortage. But it can be further defined and is further defined based on the impact that's being looked at. So the province's drought response and the actions that we'll be talking about later in the presentation is focused on responding to hydrological drought, which refers to the likelihood of impacts to ecosystems due to reduced surface and groundwater levels. While agricultural drought occurs when there's not enough water available in the soil for a particular crop to grow at a particular time. It's most often driven by a lack of precipitation, so it's closely linked to meteorological drought, but it can also be affected by a whole myriad of management factors, like water use efficiency and water use measures on farm. And I wanted to point out here that agricultural drought often occurs before, sometimes well before, a hydrological drought is declared by the province, or when we're starting to see those ecosystem impacts. And this is particularly true in dryland farming systems that are completely reliant on precipitation. BC has a drought and water scarcity response plan, and in that plan, it outlines the roles and responsibilities of all the various provincial agencies, as well as the operational actions that could be taken before, during, and after the core drought season, which typically runs from spring freshet to the onset of winter conditions in the fall, to help humans and ecosystems prepare for and manage for drought. It also outlines the framework for setting our provincial drought levels. And you can see here that we have 6 drought levels at the provincial level, which do differ from local drought stages. And that's an important point that sometimes causes some confusion for people. And these levels are set at the basin or watershed level and are updated throughout the season with details accessible to the public. And you can take a look at the BC Drought Information Portal to get some more information on how those drought levels apply across the province. You can see here from the map at any given time, there's going to be a lot of variability in the drought levels across the province, and that's not surprising given our variable terrain and climate. And then in the table here, you'll see as the drought levels increase in a given watershed in a year where we're seeing that water scarcity and impacts become more severe, the response measures move from preparedness measures through to conservation measures, sometimes including voluntary reductions or requests for voluntary reductions. And then ultimately at level 5, the potential for water curtailments. And we'll get into some more details about what that can look like. I think many on this call will be aware, but BC's Water Sustainability Act was introduced in 2016, and it's the primary piece of legislation that governs the allocation of water in BC, amongst many other aspects of water management. And what's significant here is, and of most significance to the agriculture sector, was the introduction of groundwater licensing under the WSA. And Natasha spoke about this in her presentation previously. Recognizing the often very long historic use of groundwater by farmers for irrigation and other on-farm purposes, as well as the importance of water for agriculture and food security, agriculture water users had a period of time after 2016, so up until March 2022, to apply for an existing use groundwater license for non-domestic uses, so for their agricultural uses, using a streamlined process and with the waiving of the fees that are associated. But unfortunately, a considerable number of farmers did not submit an application under that process, so they do remain unlicensed or unauthorized to use water for agricultural purposes, or they've submitted a new license application and may be waiting for a decision because there are a large volume of license applications that came through the system all at once. And until they get that decision, they're not legally able to use water. And I'll make the important point here that those that do have an existing use groundwater license application in do have the ability to use water. So it's the new license holder, the new license applicants that don't, which obviously is a concern from the perspective of certainty and certainty in terms of those people being able to use water to continue their agricultural activities. So let's turn to this simplified, very simplified diagram on the right here of how water available in the watershed is accounted for in the context of water allocation. So first off, a certain amount of water is allocated to meet environmental flow needs, and this is the volume of water that's needed to ensure proper functioning of the aquatic ecosystem in that particular basin. Next are existing licenses, which do include, of course, agricultural water uses and many others. And then in some areas of the province, there may be a volume of water that's set aside in a water reservation for a specific purpose. And although we haven't seen a lot of new ones since about 2004, I don't think any new ones since that time, but there are a few scattered across the province that are designated for irrigation purposes. And then what's left is this dark blue portion at the top. This is what's available for new licenses. And I think the situation that Coxsila illustrates very well that in some cases, this slice can be very small. And in some cases, it's actually non-existent in very water-stressed watersheds. So it's a very challenging situation indeed for decision makers that might be receiving new license applications for agricultural water use in these areas. So let's just take a kind of look at the geography here. This map gives you a sense of the watersheds that are considered to be at high risk of water shortage or high risk of drought, many of which are on the province's watershed watch list. And you'll notice that there's a strong correlation between these watersheds and where they're located and areas of significant importance to agriculture. So on Vancouver Island, the Lower Mainland, and in the Thompson-Okanagan Valley. So taking an even closer look here, we're zooming in to the Coxsila watershed, which is in the inset on the top right, and then the North Okanagan in the middle. What you'll see is the agricultural land reserve, which is shaded in dark green. And then the blue dots that you see here are all licensed points of diversion, both surface and groundwater points of diversion. What is not shown here are the many, numbering in the thousands, existing use groundwater applications that the province is currently processing. So right away, we can see that there is considerable pressure, often for agricultural uses, on surface and groundwater supplies in many, if not all, of these high-risk watersheds. We're not advancing here. Oh, there we go. So there were a few questions in the previous session on regulatory tools, and I'm not going to get into too much detail on this. This is really the realm of the Ministry of Water, Land, and Resource Stewardship, but I'm going to point out a couple of particular importance to agriculture right now. One is Section 93 unauthorized use orders. So I talked about earlier how we have many unauthorized water users at the moment. And at this point, in some very sensitive, vulnerable watersheds, some of those people are starting to receive or have received Section 93 orders asking them to stop using water essentially for agricultural purposes or face regulatory action. And this approach, recognizes and gives priority to those people that got their license and are in the system. And so we're working really hard with our colleagues in the Ministry of Water, Land, and Resource Stewardship, affectionately known as Walrus, to encourage as many producers as we can to apply for a license and start operating in that legal realm. Section 88 fish population protection order. So we heard the term earlier, TPO, a temporary protection order. So an FPPO is a type of TPO, and it's used in situations where stream flows are so low that permanent or irreversible impacts to fish populations are certain. So this is otherwise known as the critical environmental flow threshold. And I won't get into how that's set. That's very complicated. Someone who knows far more than me about hydrology will explain that. We do have some resources on our website. But in contrast to the first in time, first in right model, which is quite prevalent across North America, but it's the model where someone who has a junior license or applied for their license later is deferred to someone who has a senior license, so someone who has an older license. So those with older licenses sort of have, in theory, more certainty. But what we're seeing in some of these watersheds that are very, very vulnerable, water levels are just so low that another approach is needed to get the water flow returned to the stream. And so Section 88 orders are being used instead to target users or groups of users in an effort to restore these critically low flows. And I will say there's been some interesting analysis in the Coxsila watershed in particular, where it's even not very practical or desirable to use this fit for model because you would be cutting off things like drinking water for people before you would get to the point that you would turn off a license that might actually have a significant impact in returning water to the stream. So the key there is that a water license, even if you have it, does not necessarily ensure that water will always be available in times of drought. So we do know that there have been some TPOs as far back as 2009, so predating the WSA, But it's really since 2019 that we've started to see an uptick in their use. And you'll see here I've shaded a couple of watersheds. The Coxsila stands right out in red. It's seen 3 of these TPOs, or temporary protection orders, over the last several years. There's a couple of other basins, Salmon River, the Bissett River, and the Bissett River, sorry, that have seen multiple orders as well. This is very difficult. These are often last resort options, and nobody wants to implement these TPOs. And this really highlights the need for proactive watershed scale planning so that we can create more creative solutions together and create more certainty for producers as well in terms of water availability for their operations. And it also highlights the need for proactive efforts to reduce water demand within the agriculture sector, which can be really critical to preventing or at least delaying the onset of these kinds of actions by keeping more water in the system. And we did see that in the Coxsila Basin in recent years with scheduled water use, and I'll talk about that a bit later as well. So I think we're all very familiar with the many impacts on agricultural operations as a result of drought. What I wanted to point out here is that we used to see these impacts occurring in a given year, but now we're starting to see these impacts becoming cumulative, and particularly on perennial crop health over time. And in areas where there are other stressors, like wildfire, for example, these impacts can be even more compounded. So it's that cumulative compounding impact that's really starting to place a lot of stress on our agricultural systems and also on people. Stress and mental health impacts on farmers has been, in some of these watersheds, very acute. When your passion and livelihood are affected by conditions that are beyond your control, it takes a big toll. Which brings us to, what are we doing to prepare? What can we do to prepare? What can we do to enhance water security for the agriculture sector? Our team's work can be categorized into 4 main areas here on the right: education and extension. We have a number of funding programs. We're working on expanding our community supports, and then we participate in watershed planning and policy discussions. But I will not be able to get into the details today, so I urge everyone to take a screenshot, take a look at some of these resources that we have online. There's lots of information there. And of course, I'm more than happy to answer questions in the chat after or provide my contact information for people to get in touch with me to learn more. So we have a lot going on in the realm of education and extension. Our team is leading much of this work, but not all of it. We're very involved though. You can see here that there's a range of workshop types that we're offering, a range of field day types focused on a wide variety of topics. So some of you may have participated in our Decoding Drought series in early 2024, where we were trying to demystify provincial drought decisions and actions. We've got irrigation system field days and workshops and demonstrations. We've got a real focus right now on our team in looking at water storage options. I'll talk about that a bit more. Livestock drought management field days. So checklists, I'll talk about a bit more. So lots going on, all towards the goal of delivering training opportunities that promote data-driven, informed decision-making and beneficial management practices around farm water management. And we're, trying to get people out into the field as much as we can to do that. Beyond our team, the branch that I work in, which is called the Extension and Support Services branch, has a really amazing team of specialists and regional agrologists that are leading a number of other projects more at the regional and local level. Again, can't get into all of the details here, but all of these have a focus either directly on water management or I would say maybe water adjacent. And so we had a question in the previous session about alternative crops, for example. We do have a couple of projects that are looking at that. And in particular on Vancouver Island, I put some information in the notes and I can share that again. But overall, we're trying to encourage, again, more efficient water use, looking at water storage opportunities, possibility of more drought tolerant crops with lower water needs, and also retaining more moisture in the soil to reduce those agricultural drought impacts that I talked about earlier. We also have a number of online decision support tools. So a couple of calculators that people can use to play around with understanding their water needs if they are intending or interested in shifting to a new crop variety, for example, or changing their operation. You can use this calculator, the BC Water Calculator, to help you explore what that might look like from a water demand point of view. And then just this year, we've added a new feature, a dugout calculator. So for those that are interested in looking at the potential for water storage on their farm, they can access this dugout calculator and sort of play around with the volume that they might need, what the size might look like on their particular property, and explore kind of the first step of what that might look like. We also have an agricultural irrigation scheduling calculator. This can be a really key drought preparedness tool that recommends to the producer an irrigation schedule for their specific farm by using real-time weather data and Environment Canada's 5-day forecast to really help them apply the right amount of water at the right time based on their specific crop and soil type. And then finally, our weather station network, and I'm not even going to talk about that because we're going to hear all about it in Andy's presentation next, but it's something that we do work closely with Andy on. So moving now into our funding programs, probably the most relevant to this conversation is our agriculture water infrastructure program. It's a $100 million program that started in 2023 and will run to 2032. Or when the funding runs out. It does have 3 streams. It's a bit backwards in the sense that Stream 3 funds plans and designs, which are typically a prerequisite for many of the other activities that the program funds. But the point of the program is to encourage the upgrade or installation of new or enhanced water infrastructure to address irrigation needs, water supply and storage systems, off-farm conveyance to farms, large water supply systems off-farm. So we sort of have these 2 levels of producer projects that they can do on farm, as well as community level projects that might solve some of these problems at a higher level or at a community or watershed scale. And then a closely related program is our on-farm beneficial management practices program, which is linked with the environmental farm plan program, focusing in here on the water category. Sometimes internally we refer to this as stream 0 of the ag water infrastructure program, so that the funding does come from that program into this program. They're closely linked. It funds very similar things, but for smaller scale projects on farm. And I did want to highlight that the application window just opened yesterday for this funding program for those producers that are on the call. I hope you saw that or know that already, but if you don't, there it is. And there are a couple of changes I wanted to highlight for this year. One is we've got a new water management planning checklist that anyone can access online, and again, links on our website. This checklist will be used by qualified professionals to complete these plans. You can hire a professional to do that. The program will pay for 100% of the cost, but you can also access that document, for your own learning or to explore water management, water needs, and what that could maybe look like on your farm independently of this program, of course. We also have a new dugout checklist, again, trying to lead people through the thinking process of, how practical is it actually on my farm to build a dugout? What would it give me? How much water would I get out of it? Can I spare the land to build a dugout? Those kinds of questions. This checklist will sort of help you think through that process. And then we also added backflow prevention devices as an eligible activity. In some areas of the province, these are really necessary because we're seeing some water quality challenges with intakes coming onto farms. And so these backflow prevention devices can help prevent that. But of course, much more information on the website. I urge you to take a look. So I just wanted to highlight here that we have a number of projects. It's very exciting to see these projects kind of coming to fruition. We have everything from very small $40,000 projects on Allingham Orchards in Lake Country, where they went through the full process of having an irrigation irrigation system assessment done, and then they replaced their old irrigation system with a more efficient one. And they also put in some soil moisture sensors and monitoring abilities so that they could inform their irrigation scheduling better and better meet their water crop needs. And they figure that they will be able to improve water efficiency on their farm by over 20%. And then all the way to stream 2 under our community project stream. The city of Delta has accessed the program now a couple of times, and they're looking to upgrade all of their existing irrigation infrastructure, their conveyance system, to improve the capacity, improve the efficiency of that system to essentially all of Delta's agricultural lands. So everything from the small to the very large. And I'm hoping that we'll have some more case studies and success stories up on our website in the next little while. Don't have time to go into this too much, but just noting that we have a lot of other climate resilience programs that folks can check out. Our EFP and BMP program have many other categories, the soil management category being very relevant here in terms of supporting soil management practices that can enhance soil moisture retention. The programs that are highlighted in blue are programs that have an opening date sometime in the next 6 months. And there's variable opening dates for the BMP program. And then the ones in brown are programs that have operated in the past. They're not open now. We don't have any set dates, but we do expect that we'll see another iteration of these programs in the near future. Along the same theme as what Natasha was discussing in her presentation, we're also trying to support community-based drought solutions. I think I'm getting the hook here, Asha, maybe for time, so I don't have too many slides left. But after the very difficult 2023 drought season, we really recognize that there's a need for more targeted on-ground support in several of our high-risk watersheds on Vancouver Island, the Lower Mainland, and in the Okanagan and the Kootenays. So we do have 4 water resource and irrigation consultants in these areas, offering a range of services. And in the interest of time, I won't get into them too much, but just know that we do have some additional support on the ground, trying to move some of these collaborative community solutions forward. And we're also participating in watershed planning initiatives, trying to represent the needs of the agriculture sector. And we are participating in the Coxsila process. It's, as Natasha highlighted well, I think a very challenging and interesting one. But there's also a number of other watershed planning initiatives that are not in that formal WSP process, but that are tackling this issue of water governance and water management with a particular focus on agriculture. Initiatives like the Nechako Governance Partnership Planning Table, for example. Don't want to get into this too much, but I think some people might have seen in the media that, especially right before the election, that there's a strong advocacy amongst the sector for some kind of agricultural water reserve. So there is one piece of legislation or one piece in the WSA that may allow us to explore that further. It's a regulation that can be recommended in a water sustainability plan called a dedicated ag water regulation. It remains to be seen in these very stressed watersheds what that could look like and the impact that it could have. Because it can only reserve unrecorded and unreserved water or water that's already held under existing licenses for agricultural purposes. So stay tuned on what that might look like, but just know that that conversation is happening in the context of the Coxsila WSP. I think I'll just maybe end it there with the QR codes on the screen, but I do encourage everyone to get on our e-bulletin mailing list if you're interested in staying up to speed on these kinds of programs and developments, and follow us on Facebook. And I'll leave it there, Asha.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm always so appreciative by the true wealth of information that the ministry is able to share in a short amount of time. And I just want to encourage participants to put Q&A in the chat. Lisa will be typing responses to these through the next presentation. And of course, this whole presentation will be recorded and available after the sessions have ended. So next up, I'm really happy to welcome Andy Nadler, who has been working with ACARN for several years, including on the topic of today, which is expanding provincial weather monitoring network for agriculture. Andy is a professional agrologist and an agricultural meteorologist who's worked on weather, climate, and weather and monitoring networks in Western Canada and internationally. He's the owner of Peak Hydromet Solutions, where he collaborates very closely with organizations and farms in BC to help them enhance their sustainability and resilience through the application of new technologies and innovative solutions. So, welcome, Andy.
Thanks, Asha. I am very excited to present this topic today. It's really a culmination of a lot of work that's taken place over the last few years. Some of this work actually directly supported through ACARN. So having done some of the back work and reports and things like that, it's always nice to see these projects coming into fruition. Often when you're working on these reports and recommendations, you're always in the back of your mind, you're hoping they don't end up on a shelf and not looked at. I think that's really important. It sounds like people are maybe having some audio problems there. So maybe what I'll quickly do is I'll just switch to. Is that much better? Get a
Yes,
thumbs
it
up from
is.
someone. Okay,
Thank you.
we'll go with that. Yeah, so really seeing these reports, these studies get implemented is really it's really fulfilling professionally, personally, and I'm really happy to present this. And I guess I do have to give a huge acknowledgement to the BC Ministry of Agriculture and Food for really running with this. So I'm going to get started here. When I put this presentation together, I started with a whole bunch of slides that were trying to convince you all of the importance of weather to agriculture, how important it is. And I came to two realizations. One of them is I'm going to run out of time if I spend too much on this. And the other one is, you all know this. I think anybody who's involved in agriculture, who is even not involved in agriculture, knows how important weather is to productivity, production, yields, livelihoods. We've seen this with winter kills in the Okanagan last year. We see this with drought. We see this with excess moisture. There's so many parameters. So I can probably run through this very, very quickly, but we know, moisture, excess moisture, moisture deficits, it causes disease, fruit splitting in certain crops, temperature, of course, cold injury, heat stress, even worker safety, animal welfare, wind. There's multiple parameters. And then when we look at specifically for moisture, which is today's topic, of course, crop water demand is a major one. Now, for those who know me, may be aware that I've spent a lot of my career working in the prairies, Western Canada, Great Plains, some other countries. And the weather station on the left, it's one that I helped set up years ago. One thing you notice about it is it's definitely not in British Columbia. That's in Manitoba somewhere, and you can see that, the land just goes on and on and on. From a weather monitoring perspective, a weather station person, this is ideal. This is great. You could drive for an hour and you're not going to get major differences in temperature, humidity, those types of things. Things are relatively uniform across the landscape. So a weather station in one place, it can represent quite a large area, at least in terms of temperature. When you look at rainfall, particularly in summer, that's a little bit different because you do have convection and thunderstorms. But generally, when you get out of the mountainous areas, weather monitoring is pretty straightforward. But when you get to BC, it's a bit of a different story. Makes things a lot more interesting. So one of the things, or one of the biggest challenges, is when you are monitoring the weather is trying to get something that's representative of a field that you're actually on, or your farm, or that type of thing. If you're going by the nearest airport weather station or government weather station, it might be 20, 30 kilometers away. Is it anything like what's going on in your farm? Now, this is a chart that I've used many times, and I really like it because it's an old one, but it quantifies the error of estimation when you're looking at certain factors. Now, sensor accuracy is one thing. So if you have a weather station, you might have a little bit of variation. Not every measurement is perfect. There's a few variables in there, but usually that's maybe 5%, sometimes 2%, sometimes a little higher than 5, but it's pretty standard. And then you have things like for rainfall, if your gauge is really high, you have more error due to wind and things like that. But maybe 10%, depending on conditions. But the biggest factor by far is as you get further away from the weather station, that's when your estimation error goes out the window. So if you're right beside a weather station, if you have one on your farm, you can be pretty confident the conditions will be close. Once you get to the 7, 20, 36 kilometers away, you can get over 50% error. So at that point, it's really just a very rough estimation. So that's where, as you get further, really the value of a weather station just really, it really diminishes, as you can see. That's why some people do put weather stations on their farms themselves. Now, as I mentioned, once you get to BC, it's a little different because we have this this elevation thing going on, which makes life a little bit more complicated. Um, there's some standard changes with elevation, depending on air humidity. Say if you were in a hot air balloon and you went straight up, you'd get a standard decrease in temperature called the adiabatic lapse rate. Then you might have your level of condensation, but that can change completely if you get, say, those calm nights where basically your cold air, being denser, can drain to the lower spot. So you actually have opposite things happening. So what I'm getting at here is, as soon as you throw in elevation, things get a little bit more complicated. And as anyone who farms on areas that are, topographically diverse, know that it's very difficult to know what's happening at different elevations. So this is where it does get very challenging. So if you have a weather station, say in an upper area or a lower area, how does that actually represent your parcel of land? And that's always a challenge. Really, it comes down to the garbage in, garbage out paradigm, where if you're using weather data that's not very good, and again, if we're talking about, say, moisture management for crop water use, those types of things, if your data is not representative of your actual field, is it any good? And I think that's really important to consider. Now, I want to use Creston as an example. This is an area that we worked on a few years ago and started with doing a bit of an analysis, looking at the coverage. There's a lot of tree fruit grown in this area, tons of cherries, apples, and then some field crops as well. And what was interesting with Creston is, if you haven't been there, or if you're just looking at an aerial photo like we're doing here, you can see there's one Environment Canada station that's kind of right, almost dead center in the middle of the farmland. And if I looked at this from sitting at my desk, I'd say, well, Preston's fine. They don't need any more weather monitoring. And probably with some of the assessments, that's exactly what happened, because you actually had a good representation when you look just at distance. Now, where it gets interesting, though, is if you actually go to Creston, this is a picture of that Environment Canada weather station that was on the map. And it's not too hard to see. This is looking straight west towards the valley, but you can see that it is one of the highest points in town. It's very high up, so it does very nicely represent some areas. As you can see, there's orchards surrounding it directly, so it represents those areas really well. But when you look down into the valley, you can even see a cloud layer. So we're literally above the clouds on this particular day where the valley was. So this is where it really introduces some of that variation spatially, in terms of, if I'm farming even a few kilometers away, does this station help me at all if I'm looking at things like degree days or frost or those types of things? So this, I guess, was the start of the first network expansion within the province. This was the Creston Tree Fruit Monitoring Network. So specifically, the intended purpose was for tree fruit disease forecasting under the BC Decision Aid System, or BC DAS. This was basically in cooperation with the Sterile Insect Release Program. And what we did is we put 7 new stations in Creston, 1 in Grand Forks, basically to increase the monitoring density. Most of these stations were next to orchards or tree fruit production areas, and they were used to feed this BC DAS program for the tree fruit growers. So where we ended up, you recall the first map that just showed that one Environment Canada station. We have 7 more stations in Creston, including in the valley. These are, this lower one's not necessarily a tree fruit producing area. It's mostly forages and oil seeds, but it gives really nice coverage across the community, the agricultural area of the community. Now, if we look at just some very brief examples of the conditions, this one might be a little bit hard to see. The numbers are a bit smaller than on my big screen, but a couple days ago, I just took minimum temperatures from January 13th, so literally 2 days ago, the minimum overnight temperatures, and you can see some pretty crazy variation here. Up in the north here, minus 4.1, minus 3.5, minus 5.1, minus 3. You have quite a large difference, about 4 degrees difference between the different stations in terms of the low temperature. Another example I took was in October, so this is in fall, just a few months ago, looking at an overnight frost event, and here you can see that the colder areas, I think we got minus 3.6, but then a couple of the areas didn't even frost, 3.3. So you have about a 6 degree difference, or almost a 7 degree difference between these stations that are probably only, I'm going to guess, maybe 5 kilometers apart. So not a huge difference. So this is really where the value comes in having better monitoring. So fast forward a year in the Okanagan, this was another initiative that basically realizing some of the value of this was the Okanagan Similkameen Tree Fruit Monitoring Network. These are 25 new weather stations that were put out. This is with BC Agriculture and specifically for tree fruit. But the nice thing with these weather stations is they are placed so that they can be used for a lot of things. So there's a lot of new weather data that's available for farmers, for researchers, for a lot of different applications. Now, what I mentioned at the start is this was really building on some of the work that was done previously, a 2001 study, a roadmap for sustainable agricultural weather monitoring. And one of the things I identified was all the many gaps in monitoring, looking at where's the agricultural land, where are the weather stations. So there's quite a few gaps that were identified. And next steps is going to be to address, definitely not all of them, unfortunately, but working towards addressing some of these agricultural gaps so that we can get better weather monitoring across the agricultural landscape. Now, what I do want to get to, and I think this is probably the most exciting part, and there's a lot of work that went into this, is the dissemination of this information. It's one thing to collect information. It's all that more important to actually get it in the hands of users. This is a very farmer-focused platform that we've developed. It's called BC AgriWeather, and it's pretty much it's a tool set that is going to be growing. It's only been launched in the last couple of weeks, so it is new. But what it has is about 230 weather stations throughout BC. So this brings in not just the agricultural weather stations, but Environment Canada, Ministry of Transportation, Ministry of Forests, Metro Vancouver, a couple of other networks. But it brings in to one source all of these weather stations, gives current conditions, so it's updated constantly. So for operational decisions, spraying, irrigation, that type of thing, it gives historical weather. For water management, and this is a part that will be growing, is the crop water demand for irrigation scheduling. So farmers can look at what the atmospheric demand is for moisture and adapt their irrigation schedules accordingly. Things like growing degree days or heat thermal units for tracking pest disease or crop development. So a number of tools that are coming, and it's mobile and desktop friendly, and it's free for growers. Well, free for everyone. Just a couple of examples of, you're welcome to go to it. I'll show the URL in a second, or if you can read really well, it's right up top. But it does show current conditions. So most of them are updated either hourly or every 15 minutes. So it shows current wind speeds, rainfall, temperatures, humidities, as well as 24-hour, 7-day trends, yesterday's conditions, pretty much a snapshot of what's going on in terms of weather conditions. And then I mentioned evapotranspiration. So this is the atmospheric demand for water. So you can see that this is just an example from June in the Lower Mainland. It shows the daily crop water demand with the cumulative, and then we have things like effective rainfall to know what's going on moisture-wise. And then degree days, same sort of thing. It would be accumulation since either the start of the growing season or from a certain start point to look at things including, what would be the useful heat for the growth and development of plants. Now, in terms of what's next, just a few things that I'll throw out there to look for. Additional stations will be going out, so I don't have an exact number, but in the next probably few months there will be more weather stations going in to fill some of those gaps. Specifically, some of the gaps we have been addressing there's been a lot of talk about the Coke Silo watershed. We did put one in there last year, so there is a dedicated weather station in that area. Lisa mentioned the North Okanagan. I think we've put about 5 of them in the North Okanagan, including South Thompson towards Westwold area. So in addition to areas that are maybe have less coverage, we're also looking at areas who've had some of these challenges with with water supply. Website enhancements will continue. We're going to add things like weather forecasts, climate normals, which are important. It's an interesting topic because it's hard to say if there's such thing as climate averages or normals anymore because things do change, but I think there's some value there. Working on some AI-based data quality control, more decision support tools, potentially some commodity specific tools, and then of course partnerships. I mentioned early on or a minute ago that the data is free. I think being ACARN researchers, users, I would encourage you to use the data because that's what it's there for. And I'm really a fan of getting this information out. The more people that are using it, the better. So with that, I think I'm within time. I'll open it up to questions. And you can see the URL is bcagriweather.ca, or if you want to put your phone up to your computer, you can also scan it. So thank you very much. And with that, I'll hand it back to Asha.
Thank you so much, Andy. What a great overview of this upcoming tool. I think you always have such a great kind of overview of the data and what led to it. So I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. And we are running a little behind, unfortunately. So I'm just going to encourage Andy and Lisa to go into the Q&A box and just type your responses in there. Anything that isn't answered, I'll just remind everyone that we will be following up with responses after the session ends. But to make sure we have time for our esteemed final presenter of this session, I'd like to introduce Wayne Saluski, who will be speaking on how watercourses on ranches are being regenerated through Beaver Dam Analogues. And this is happening in the Nechako Valley. We're happy to have Wayne here. I'd like to note that he was probably the first range officer in the ranger station in Vanderhoof. He's the current chair of both the Nechako White Sturgeon Recovery Center and the Nechako Environment and Water Stewardship Society, and has worked with many initiatives and has been recognized provincially by DFO. He was also nominated for a King Charles 111 Coronation Medal for his contributions to conservation. So I'm really happy to hear about Wayne's work to bring together ranchers and conservationists in the North. So take it away, Wayne.
Thanks, both for the introduction and the opportunity. Were really interesting. I never heard anything about the Nechako Valley in the presentations here. Vanderhoof, Nechako Valley area is the second largest agricultural belt in the province, geographic center of the province. We're kind of as background, we're kind of a hay, cattle, cash crop type of a community. And interestingly, we have 32 streams that flow through our agricultural belt and into the Nechako River. And most of these streams are non-natal salmon habitat, salmon rearing habitat. So really important from all sides of that. You see what we're going through here. That is a stream. That's very typical of a lot of our class 5 and 6 streams that are going through there. We're just finished 4 years of drought. We're going to have it again. Our snowpack is 63% of the average. I see my garden ornaments popping out through the lawn. We've had a decade and a half of the largest wildfires on record. The Nechako Reservoir, which is the dam that holds back the Nechako River, is at an all-time historic low, 63 years. The river's at an historic low. And in 2023, we saw massive changes in our agricultural community, record sales, cattle sales, no hay, no pastures, and a large sell-off. So we are in some trouble, and it looks to be something that's going to happen again. And so what's our solutions? What's the objectives? Well, one of the things I'm a proponent of, slow the water down, don't let it flush out into the river, don't let it head to the ocean without having done its work. So we set it out to grow and support our riparian zones, to reestablish stream channels, to support aquatic life, salmon, rainbows, everything that's in there. And most importantly, critically important, is the underground storage of the aquifer. And of course, that's the part that really supports the streams, the fields, the farms, and the fish populations that are there. So we've been around for 15, 17, 18 years now doing these types of things. Usually we're replacing crushed culverts with bridges on farms at our cost, but we're certainly rebuilding streams, working with farms to create stewardship strategies. And so for this iteration, this last year, we installed 40 of these Beaver Dam Analogues on 4 different farms, 3 different streams. And most critically important, we also established 18 shallow test wells, tied ourselves into government, walrus staff here. And then one of the costs of doing this, when you create water flow, you actually create an access problem. So we established a 50-foot bridge, and we needed to move fish up. And you'll see in a moment one BDA that is a challenge here. So we'll go through. So there's actually 3 different types of BDAs, and there's 3 different types of expenses that are related to that. Our streams can be higher gradient, water moves through quickly, so we want to stop it, slow it down completely. We want to provide that water for the other uses that are there. And in a couple of cases, we actually want to recognize beaver activities and enhance. And so we can have a stream that won't have beavers on it for 20, 30 years. As we grow the food, we have other streams that we have some, and then we have some that are really well suited for it. Do we expect beavers to move in all? Not really. Will they? Probably over time. One time we had millions of beavers, millions of ponds, and actually millions of fish too. So this is a really interesting stream. This one actually, Knight Creek, flows through the agricultural community into the district of Vander, whose property. You can see a healthy riparian zone for the most part here. It's a slow moving stream at the bottom end, but really fast to get there. And interestingly, last year, we salvaged 800 fish out of 7 mud puddles that were the result of drying up issues. Of those 800 fish, 350 of those were Chinook fry, 200 were rainbow. So all of value to the community, all value to the nations. But you can have other pieces of the stream that are absolutely different. So this was a functioning stream, was a functioning salmon stream. The riparian zone has been completely lost on it. So the gentleman, the family that owns this, actually wanted to grow trees along the riparian zone, and so the trade-off was really easy. There is no beavers going to be there for a long time. You can see that. It's just a straight shot to the next farmer's property. And so this was our first BDA that was on there. So the water in that stream when we constructed this was about 4 centimeters, not over the top of your sneakers, period. And you can see as it backed up already the life that is there. We planted this with thousands of willows. I don't have a count on it. I do know that we also put 1,500 cottonwoods in there. And this following spring, we're going to plant it up with spruce there to sort of create that riparian zone, to create that snow catchment area, and to slow the wind down. That's there. Other types here, we actually have beaver dams that were functioning, that were really working for the farmer, but they weren't working for the Ministry of Highways, and they created fish passage issues that were there. So we have three different types of installation possibilities. Interestingly, this farmer here was quite happy with the beavers and the beaver activity. He's probably the only agricultural producer that was actually getting to irrigate, licensed up, but getting to irrigate because of the work that the beavers had done for him. Again, Highways wasn't overly impressed, but we talked them into holding it out. And so you can see we removed the plug from the beaver dam that was there. We actually used that water to hydrate some overwintering ponds that we built on the next property, and we also installed 8 beaver dam analogues on the downstream property. So this is a rather massive beaver dam analog. It's the largest of the 40 that we built. You can see a piece of machinery there. There's light hands on the land is a principled idea, but when you're trying to do this, it's very labor intensive. So we simply put rig mats down, walked our machinery out there, and transported everything there. If you stare into that picture, you can see the pump house for the irrigation there. And if you look even harder at the pump house, you'll see 2 feet below the aluminum roof, the high water mark. So we have actually had water that completely flooded that valley, that gully, and was problematic for everybody downstream as we go through. You can also see that our beaver dam analog is below the beaver house. The beavers weren't there. They had been removed, unfortunately, 2 years ago and hadn't repopulated. But we actually had a muskrat that came about immediately as we were there and actually worked beside our machinery to contribute his enthusiasm and weeds and sticks as he was building this. He actually saw value to it, which was lots of fun for everybody. We have worked hard with government. We're really, really pleased with our relationship with Walrus staff, Ministry of Forest staff, the scientists that are there. We have all agreed that there's bad beavers and there's good beavers. Bad beavers need to be relocated. Good beavers need to be worked with. And so we talked Ministry of Highways into contributing to some beaver discouragement here. So you can see we put some nose cones on the culverts that are there. And the theory is that the fish can pass through, but the beavers can't get a foothold, a link on it there. So really an intuitive solution rather than removing the beavers permanently. Let's work with them. The monitoring wells are critically important. That's the science part of this issue that is there. We've established 18 of these monitoring wells, and we will establish another 20 over the next 2 years to actually monitor water penetration in there. So these are all instrumented up. When it's completed, every series of monitoring wells on one property will talk to a key well, and that technology will then, through either satellite or cell phone technology, talk to each other, and those will then talk to your desktop, and we can in live time actually showcase the water penetration that is there. If you look at the slide on the right hand side, you can see our overwintering ponds. So we have on this property built 4 overwintering ponds. They're 10, 12 feet deep. They're large. They will keep fish well alive, but they're also of great value for other reasons and other things. And there, so if you're permitted, obviously a livestock watering opportunity. If you have a wildfire interface issue, you have an absolute perfect start on bucketing with helicopters out of there. The airport, the fire base is actually really close. So from an interface standpoint, these are intuitive and strategic. We are industrial. It would be nice to have teams of students working on these types of things, but we are doing this in a very industrial way. We talked our contractor into buying a head for his excavator to collect the willows, and we simply cut the willows into batches. We're actually looking for fields of 20-foot tall willows. We cut them into 3 sections, and we use each of those sections in building our Beaver Dam Analogues and planting the surrounding areas up, so we get a really quick and efficient ways. Years ago, our first BDAs were done by hand. You grabbed one in your hand, you sawed it off, you threw it over your back, somebody put it into a bundle. This is much more effective, much more cost efficient, and we actually use end dumps in order to bring it to site and mobilize it. So again, working within the fish windows, working within the parameters we given, we really needed to be industrial in doing it. You see the product from the willows on your right-hand panel there. Those are the bottoms of our willow stands that were there. So nicely sorted to do it, and we'll show you how our BDAs are built. On the left-hand panel, you see the posts. So these are called postless assisted Beaver Dam Analogues. So we build the Beaver Dam Analogue and we pound the posts in to give it stability. We are anticipating a 10 to 15-year lifespan of those Beaver Dam Analogues without any help from beavers, period. So, and then really interesting and importantly, this is a commercial thin in a industrial plantation, a forestry plantation that's there, where they have gone in and thinned them out. So a gentleman in Fraser Lake has bought a European forwarder, so he actually goes in there and nicely extracts them, cuts them to length, and sharpen them up. In our case, we want them untreated. In his case, his business actually is building fence posts, and so he sends the rest off to treatment. So he's pretty pleased to have met us because this is a good byproduct use. Building BDAs is not complicated. We took over the term building lasagna. Is no different than building a lasagna in your kitchen. We put a layer of spruce boughs down, a layer of willows, a layer of spruce boughs, some dirt. We pat it all down, jump on it, push it down with our with our excavator head. Period. And you can see we just build it up, and we build it up to the level of the bank that is there. So we're not creating a flooding opportunity, but rather the overflow functions wonderfully, and it just holds water back, slows water down, allows it to do its job for us, whether it's irrigation, homing fish, penetrating into the aquifer. Again, you can see the whole process on the right-hand panel. We're actually driving those posts in after construction. This is our largest BDA on the operation, and we will have multiple ones behind it to continue to feed in. And this gentleman will both irrigate, but he will also raise salmon fry for us without actually realizing that he's doing it. The willows on the left-hand panel, you can see we literally plant hundreds of thousands of them. We're using an excavator to do this work on the farm here. We're actually putting the excavator head into the terra firma, pulling it back, shoving our willows in, pushing it back and going through. And we will expect to have a wonderful riparian zone to provide that shelter that's needed both for dehydration of the pond or the coolness needed for fish that are there. This is again one of the 4 BDAs, and you can see after we're finished, we laid a bed of straw down there to protect it from this spring's coming rains, and it looks beautiful as the snow is laying on it right now. Lots of interesting observations, lots of things that we've learned. Ministry of Forest, Walrus, Agriculture, everybody was intrigued by this, but was really frightened of the permitting of it. If we remember back in time, those are of my age, we used to fine people who put machinery into streams, who block streams. In today's world, to do this has risks, and we have to evaluate and understand what those risks are. But the staff have been absolutely brilliant. We hosted field days. We had 42 people from the nations through to staff, to farmers, to producers, to see what we're doing. We worked with the BC Wildlife Federation, which has been a leader and a partner in BDAs across the province here, and they worked with many farms and ranches through the southern interior. We have built BDAs as a new society before, but they were always small and not as industrial as needed and didn't actually do the work we wanted. In some cases, they were leaf filters. The water filtered through them, but it actually didn't back it up. So these are very industrial. We working with inside the permitting system, the window that we are given, it's really tight because fish are a priority, and so we have that, and we probably bit off a little more than we chewed, but with climate changes of where we are, rather than being snowed out on Halloween, we actually got right up to the 20th of October. So we finished the day that it snowed, so it really worked. Adding science to this has been brilliant, has been really timely. We have students out of our university in Prince George, UNBC, working with us, doing monitoring issues, monitoring opportunities. So we provide a lot of science opportunities for master's and PhD students. Convincing producers that this is a good idea is a work in progress, period. It just simply is. We'll see how this turns out at the end of the day. Bringing value to the agriculture community is really easy. There's a source of water for you there. There's a place for bucket ships. There's a place for your cattle to hide. We're putting water into the aquifer. We know empirically that this is good for the farm, good for the fields that are there. Period. And it adds a stewardship component to the agricultural community that is really critical there. A guy's push for this lady, never met her, read her book 3 or 4 years ago, totally enthralling. Slow water down, use it. Agricultural producers around the world have followed what she is preaching. I would highly recommend that you read her. She's a very accredited lady, and I'm totally impressed with what we gained out of that whole process. We can't do this without funders. This is really a huge issue to do this. We're doing this on private land, and we're investing a lot of money. Our new society has invested probably over $3 million on private farms in the Nechako Valley. We have strong uptake. We have some strong followers, but we haven't converted everybody into that. But working with that, putting university into that, we see our producers, kids in these universities. So a lot of what is happening here actually comes back to the kitchen table. So we're really excited about that aspect of it. You can't do this without funders. That's all there is to it. And so that's kind of the round picture of what news is all about. We're excited to be here. We have 3 more years of funding. We've added some science to the fish issues. So this next year, we're going to pit tag 1,000 Chinook fry from the Spruce City hatchery in Prince George, and we're going to track them in and out as they migrate in and out of the system that's there. We have school kids from our school district that are directly involved in this sort of a thing. So it's really homey, and it's the kids that talk mom and dad into this idea and point out the value of beavers, the values of the fish populations that are there, and then the value to the farm.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Wayne, for your time. And I just want to point out, we unfortunately don't have time for questions, but one of them is are these initiatives happening in other parts of the province? I think you've set like a really stunning example of how to mobilize and bring people together and, get the work done. So big props to you and your team and all the folks working on the project. It's my first time hearing about Beaver Dam Analogues, so I hope that some of our audience are inspired by this work that you're doing. Again, thanks to all of our presenters for joining us this morning. We are running a little bit behind time, but not for a bad reason. Really wonderful presentations from everyone. I'll just note that our next session is a discussion session, so we're switching over into Zoom meeting mode. So you'll need a separate Zoom link to access that session. That should be in the chat as well as in the program and any of the emails that you've received from us. We'll see you over there at 11:35. We're just going to push it back by 5 minutes so we can all have a chance to stretch our legs. But we will be diving into a great discussion. It's an opportunity for you all to connect with each other. We'll have small breakout rooms, but we'll be kicking things off with a discussion about evapotranspiration and integrating plant-based approaches to optimize irrigation. So not something you want to miss. And yeah, we appreciate again you all participating and being here for these sessions. There should be a feedback survey that's in the chat as well. We would love if you could take a couple minutes to fill that out. It really is just in service of you to make sure that we are constantly improving our offerings. Yeah, so I hope to see you over in about 10 minutes in the next session. Thanks, everyone.